So we are live. We're here early. I'm here with Manuel Galvan, and I won't introduce Manuel yet. I'm going to wait a few minutes, but we wanted to get on early. We have one viewer. That's nice. We wanted to get on early just to make sure that um, the technology is working, and so I think it is. It seems cool. I'm going to check Twitter to make sure that it's going well. It should pop up as a tweet right now. Yeah, yeah, that's good. So it looks good, man. It looks good. All right. So yeah. So you have a YouTube channel. How's that? Are you still producing YouTube? I was impressed with one of those videos you did.
I it is just so much work. If I had an editor, I think I'd be more prolific, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um given the way that it works, I think I'm going to move over to producing podcast content, and I might just like release my podcast also on YouTube so that you can just like watch them there, and that way the channel's not completely dead. But I got 70% of the way into recording my next video, which was about system justification.
Hmm.
um and then yeah, I just couldn't get it over the hump. So yeah.
Yeah, man. So you put a lot of value into your videos. So of course it means it takes a lot of work for you to produce it. And so I don't know, man. I mean, I was wondering. I was like, gosh, this is really like I'll just talk. Like I'll just start the camera and just start
Yeah,
talking because I can't do all that stuff, man. I got other stuff going on. So,
definitely.
but Substack is really good. It's a nice platform. I use Substack just for writing, but they've got it now where you can put your podcast up there, and then you've got you can put videos up there. So, I mean, you might want to consider that. I love it. I really do.
uh
Um,
but I would still have to go through the whole editorial process to like make the videos, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not going to stop that, prevent that. But the platform itself is a really good one to work with. And it's a centralized thing now. So you have your writing, you can have your podcast, and then if you want to do a video, you can do that. And then once you get all these followers you're going to get, you can just say, okay, click paid subscribers, and then you can get a little more incentive for producing work. So yeah, I mean that's something to think about, right?
Yeah, I am curious about at what point I'll feel like I want to monetize what I do, because so far it's just I have so few people who are paying attention to me that it doesn't make any sense to even think about right now. But
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, even if you get, so I don't have that many people paying attention to me either, but I don't think I'll ever get to the point where I want to monetize because I feel it's going to introduce something into the dynamic that I don't like. Now, of
Right,
course,
there's a
if I,
change in incentives that
yes,
is
very
interesting.
much. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's
And
like
I'm,
audience capture where now you have to feed information to that particular audience so they don't leave you,
that's right.
and they keep bringing in those people. I feel like something like that has happened to people like Sam Harris and definitely the James Lindsay,
That's
like
right. That's exactly what
incredible.
happens. Yeah. And it's really unfortunate, but I mean, that's their job. So I'm lucky, and I think you're going to be lucky too, in that it won't be your job. You can do it as just a way to inform the public, and you don't have to worry about profiting from that information. So we'll see how it goes, man. We're saying that now. We'll see what happens in 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's about time to start. So I'm gonna introduce myself, and then I will introduce Manuel. So for those who are just dropping in and you've never seen this before, my name is Rod Graham. I like to call myself your neighborhood sociologist. Maybe I should say the neighborhood sociologist. I should maybe think of myself as the singular, like how many people say that. So anyway, that's kind of how I market myself when I'm on social media, because I like to talk about sociology. I also do a YouTube channel where I like to talk to interesting people. Now, this is a special one in that we have a specific topic that we're going to explore, and it is censorship. And I'm here with a fellow academic and a friend, Manuel Galvan. Now, let me say a little bit about Manuel, and then we'll dive in. So, he is a PhD student at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in social psychology. He is a health policy research scholar, and that's a program for full-time doctoral students who want to apply their research to advance health and equity. Good on you, Manuel. Good on you. He is also the founder of the Science of Social Problems YouTube channel, where he doesn't do a lot of videos, as we talked before we were on the air, but he puts a lot of quality into that. And he's a co-host of a new podcast called A Bit More Complicated. So I'm going to put Manuel's Twitter handle here so that you can follow him and you can get more information about these products that he produces. And I think that's really cool what he's doing. I don't know how you get the time, honestly. When I was a PhD student, the first thing in my mind was like, okay, do I understand what I'm reading? What is SPSS? Like, this is what was going through my mind. I didn't have time to be putting out this kind of stuff. So that's pretty good, man. I mean, that has to speak to your energy level and your interest in this stuff. So did I leave anything out, brother?
Also my Science of Social Problems blog, which if my YouTube channel is bereft of content, but my blog is a little bit more content rich. So I think I have like a little over 10 posts or something like that, so people can read my thoughts there more. And then that's that. You covered everything really well. I appreciate you. So much time and effort has gone into like making sure that introduction as well. And then my Twitter handle's on screen. I appreciate it. I really appreciate Rod. He's done so much to one of the first people to kind of identify me as like as a new science communicator, and then like share with his audience that I'm someone that is worth paying attention to. And I think I definitely picked up a significant number of followers on Twitter, for example, and reads of my blog because of Rod's interest and generosity and sharing my content. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. Cool, man. Yeah, man, you deserve it. So we're going to talk about censorship here today. And as usual, we have some questions prepared, but this time I sent questions to Manuel, and Manuel was like, well, here are some different ones.
Okay, to be clear.
So I was like, all right, brother. Okay, fine. Those are better anyway.
He said, like, I am, happy to hear if you have anything else. And I had actually also written up like some stuff on the side. I always come into an interview with some stuff that I've like put down on paper to make sure I have something to grasp to whenever I feel like I don't know what I want to talk about. So you just very like quickly were like, sure, we can talk about that instead. So yeah, either way is fine.
Yeah, but they were really good. So what we're going to do is we're going to put them up, and we'll just have a back and forth about censorship. Just to start, Manuel and I will disagree on some things, I'm sure, and that's why we're having the conversation. So let's see here. You brought this question up. What is the difference between editorial oversight and censoriousness? I shortened it a little bit from what you sent me. Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by that?
Or even just disagreement, right? So I think like we live in a really interesting time where you can basically just pick up a computer and you can just create a website or create a Substack or create a YouTube channel or whatever. Even just go on Reddit and you can garner like a huge audience that's paying attention to you. And in the past, prior to, in every era of human civilization up until basically now, that there's been such a difficult time to do that. It's been a lot harder to reach an audience of millions of people. And so now there's a conversation happening about like, should, Joe Rogan, him spreading, for example, misinformation amongst everyone.
You kind of froze a bit.
Is it me that's creating the problem?
Okay. You're at Joe Rogan. Just say that again. There's a thing with Joe Rogan.
Anyway, so yeah, Joe Rogan, I think this is where I really started thinking about this a little bit more is he's kind of just a normal guy who has a podcast that now is the single biggest platform to reach people, right? Like it's more so than like people don't really recognize this, but like more so than any Fox News host or whatever. More people listen to any given episode of Joe Rogan than any other thing. Of course, he only produces, I think, like an episode a week or whatever. So, Tucker Carlson goes on every night. And so you could argue that he gets more eyes on him. But there's no editorial oversight. And this is just a new problem we're having to grapple with. And I'm not saying I know the right answers, but there is this difference between let's censor Joe Rogan and why is there not editorial oversight like there always has been in the past, where a group of people kind of make a collective decision about like, oh, this meets muster, this is like good information to spread versus not. And I feel like that conversation is getting wrapped up into a broad statement about censoriousness, that everybody just wants to censor Joe Rogan. It's like, well, no, it's a more nuanced conversation than that, about like what is good information, what's bad information, and what is a new environment where there's no filter anymore due to society. And so I think we just don't have the answers to those questions. And so we're in a new era where we have to grapple with those questions. And so I feel like there's an absolutist position here that there's no questions here. Everybody should be able to say everything they want all the time, nonstop, and nobody can push back. And like, that's the absolutist position. And I just don't buy that. I just think it's more complicated than that.
Okay, so well, I certainly agree that there needs to be some sort of oversight. If you own a platform, then you need to oversight its contents.
Yeah,
totally. So the question is, should Spotify be the person that, or the group that says, all right, Joe, a lot of what you're putting out here is clearly not the understanding coming from academics and scientists. Are they the ones that should have that oversight, or should it be Joe Rogan?
Yeah, so I think the Joe Rogan question is unique in the sense that they give him a $100 million payment for a contract. So if Joe Rogan is simply another person on their platform, like, so there's been some specious comparisons of like, who's that rapper who was anyway, there's like music that has really terrible things in it, right? You could probably listen to like white people say the N-word over and over again on Spotify. Like, that's a thing. Why isn't that removed? And so the difference is those people don't have contracts under Spotify. Like, right, that's the relevant difference here, right? Spotify is paying him to be on their platform.
Okay.
So in that sense, like, yeah, it makes sense that your boss, if you are at a newspaper, the editor, the boss, the people who are in charge of that newspaper get to decide what is on their platform. Joe Rogan is not simply, I heard this comparison recently on the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and I think it's really good. People talk about a public square, right? I should be able to access the public square. It's a public good. Joe Rogan is not accessing a public square. He's standing on a balcony that is owned by someone else, right? And that person who owns that balcony has some responsibility of how that space is used. Now, so if he wants to go back to the public square where he doesn't have $100 million contract and he doesn't have a megaphone on a balcony, then he could do that, right? And like, but that's where the conversation is at. Like, what responsibility does Spotify have given the $100 million contract that he has with them?
All right, so okay, first I'm going to say that I didn't see a contradiction. Like, I didn't see a difference between editorial oversight and censoriousness that needed to be discussed. So I wanted to hear like what you meant by that. I saw one as like the state of censoring, and that was like a cultural thing, and then another one was the nuts and bolts of deciding what you put on the platform, which is okay. I kind of get what's happening here. Okay, well, look now. What if Spotify says, we've oversighted, we've looked at it, and we think, man, this guy's doing edgy stuff, so he's going to get a lot of people. Man, this dude has got the biggest platform in the world. Keep doing what you're doing. We've done our oversight. Then what?
That's essentially what Fox News has done, right? Like, the editors over at Fox News have decided, you know what? We don't care too much that the content on our channel is full of fake information and stuff, which is fine. Like, that just like we understand where Spotify is coming from. But if they did engage in editorial oversight, I just don't think it would be censoring him. Like,
okay, so yeah. I agree with that totally. I mean, even Twitter. So I agree, and then I'm going to add in a little kink to this. So I agree. If you own a platform, which even Twitter would be a platform, YouTube would be a platform, Spotify, blah blah blah, you have control over what your content is, or what content is shown on that platform. You should. It's your business. And so I don't think that that's necessarily censoring. So in that way, I agree. Okay. My concern would be that what if a platform doesn't apply the rules equally? So, okay, I'm going to use an outlandish example. Okay, that doesn't happen, but it's just to sort of prove the point. Suppose on YouTube you had black people saying, you know what, I don't like white people, and they should leave this country. They've screwed it up. And what's with all this mayonnaise they're eating? Something like that. Because it's the joke. And so
Yeah.
and so black folks say that, and they're basically throwing shade on white folks and saying all these nasty things about white folks.
Mhm.
Okay, um, and then a white person does that towards black people.
Mhm.
YouTube then, exercises their right to maybe deplatform one of those, not both. And they deplatform the white person for saying bad things about black people. That I might have a problem with. That to me is now censoriousness because the rules aren't applied equally.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two situations. So I think in the exact situation you described, I have a problem with that as well, because the bar is extremely low, right? It's just like talking bad about black people, like that's all.
Mhm.
That's all that you need to do. Like that seems like an extraordinarily low bar. There's a similar debate that occurred on Twitch, which maybe you heard about, which is you can't say cracker, and people were getting banned from Twitch for using the slur cracker.
Interesting. No, I didn't.
Did
I
you
didn't
hear?
know
You
about
hadn't heard
this.
about
No.
this?
Mm-mm.
So, yeah, that was happening at the same time, though. A lot of and this is including like white. So what's interesting is there's black content creators on Twitch, presumably saying the N word,
Mhm.
right? Like they just are, they can, because there's a historical precedent around saying the N word, if you're black. Um,
Yeah.
but white YouTubers were being thrown off of YouTube for saying cracker. And it's an interesting thing. There was like several that were like actually banned. Like Vosh in particular was actually banned from Twitch for using the word cracker and like describe and talking about it. So there is already kind of a double standard, and some people were pointing that out. And I also,
Mhm.
but I also think like sometimes double standards make sense. There's a cultural reason why there's a double standard, for why. So why can black content creators get away with spamming the N word, but white content creators can't? Why is there a double standard? And somebody would ask me that question, I'd laugh because that's kind of absurd, because there's a cultural there's a cultural context under which this is happening. And I'm
Mhm.
okay with black content creators saying the N word. I'm not okay with white content creators saying it. And I think that it makes sense if that's your like TOS. Yeah, I know it like is touchy, right? But
Yeah.
we already
Yeah.
apply this TOS in regular life, right? Like we already have the expectation that white people can't just spam the N word, but we don't have that expectation of black people in our friend groups and stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a similar kind of
So
thing.
I'm imagining in my head what a board meeting would be about where they're writing the TOS, right? The terms of service. And it's like, all right, you can't say any slurs, but wait, what if black people want to say the N-word? Okay, that's fine. Like how do you even write that, to take, because you're right. I mean, context does matter. People don't like that actually, but power differences in society do determine how certain words are understood and the impact of them.
Right.
Clearly. Um, but but I think so. In my view, this is how I'm thinking about it,
Sure.
and this will probably go against probably what a lot of my progressive friends would agree with.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think it's if Joe Rogan wants to use the N word, and you're going to let other people use the N word, even if I know outside of that business culturally, there's a big difference. You can't write the rules differently for different people. Unless you got some kind of formula where you can quantify power differences and say, okay, under this situation, this slur is possible to be used, and in this situation, it can't. Blah blah blah. If you can't come up with that, and I don't think you can, then everyone should be able to say it. I mean,
Interesting.
yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily like it, but I think outside of a cultural context, and we're in some kind of legal or standards context. No, Joe Rogan. Look, if you want to use the N word, Joe, and your followers don't call you out for it, and Spotify is going to pay you for it. I mean, you know, what
It's
what
just
what can I
yeah.
do about that?
It's interesting because like I think you would agree that in pretty much plenty of other lines of business, you would apply a similar standard, right? So if you invite over a plumber to work on your house and they take a phone call and it's a black dude that is working as a plumber in your house and he's like saying the N-word several times, you're going
Mhm.
to feel differently about that guy than if it's a white dude who says the N-word several times on your phone. And
That's
you
true.
probably would fire that guy if it was a white dude, right? Like, I don't want this dude who's like spamming the N-word in my home.
That's a good. That's pretty interesting. Yes, you're right. I would not want that white dude in my house
So
using
it
the
just,
N word on his phone.
and in that sense, you are a person who has employed somebody,
Hmm.
and you have a standard, and the standards are different. Despite the fact that it is uncomfy to talk about, there are different standards. And I think like the need for a, quantitative measure here, it just seems like needlessly um like high standard. Like, we already have a standard here. It's that white people can't say this word, and we already know, and there's just like an accepted standard here. Certainly, like, people get into the use versus mention distinction.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
don't know. We can have that conversation if you want to. For the purposes of our conversation, we're just talking about using it, not just
Right.
mentioning it.
Exactly. Hmm. Okay. Fair enough. That is something to think about, actually.
The other thing
Mhm.
on this question, or if you're feeling like we're going to move away from it, the other thing here is the difference between disagreement and censoriousness, which I think is more relevant to Emma, what's her last name? Camp.
Uh-oh.
Emma
Yeah,
Camp.
Emma Camp. Thank you. Hmm.
It's more relevant to her conversation, and I watched her debate conversation with Brianna Gray, I think is her name,
Hmm.
from the Bad Faiths podcast. Um, and I think this is just the thing that she's not really grappling with. I feel like the New York Times article she wrote doesn't really grapple with this. Like, at what point is just other people using their speech to disagree with you become censoring? And that's really unclear to me. There's like a really gray area here. So I don't know if you have
Yeah.
thoughts on that.
Well, that's not censoring. That's just other people disagreeing. When I think
But
of
so much
censor,
of what she talks about in that paper is
uh,
just like people moved in their seats, like they didn't like me as much the next day or whatever. And it's like, that's just them disagreeing with you. Like, I don't know.
that's true. But as human beings, if everyone is disagreeing with you, you're going to self-censor.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
to the extent that we want that to happen, fine. My argument would be that in certain contexts, we don't want that happening. We want people to feel that they can that the range of what they can say is pretty wide. Obviously, you don't want to go into class and say, "Hey, you're a jerk," and this kind of thing. Clearly, but if you are articulating some different point of view, and the class is organized where that people should be discussing things, then you should be able to do it. Now I remember that tweet that tweet thread that I deleted. It was a part of that, and I was relaying an experience from my class where, okay, I'm teaching this racial inequality class. This is some years ago, but I taught it for 3 or 4 years straight, and I noticed after the first or second year that white students simply, I mean, it was obvious that they had different views, but they wouldn't say anything. One time, maybe 2 or 3 times, and with one student in particular, they would say something, and then they would get a lot of flack. And the flack was not, and then it wasn't academic, right? It was more like, "Oh, how could you say such a thing?" Like, it was personal, and so of course that student would then, you know, say nothing. That's bad. She self-censored. Um, I said she, which isn't good, but that student self-censored, and I don't like that at all. And so that's where I sort of agreed with the Camp op-ed. We have to do something about that, not just in academia, but also if you have a town hall meeting and people are trying to articulate their views on an issue, let them do it. Don't get mad at them if you think what they're saying is racist or sexist or transphobic. That should be the space where they can talk about those things. Um, so yeah, we're kind of going off a little bit, but that's kind of my thoughts about that.
Yeah. I still feel like there's this weird distinction. So, me, let's say we, go to a town hall meeting, and what's being discussed at the town hall meeting is someone, a black person being elected to office. Somebody raises their voice and says, "Hey, I actually think because of disparities in IQ, like, we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't hire this person. They
Mhm.
shouldn't be allowed. They shouldn't be allowed." Like, let's just say that's how extreme their position is. Yeah, we could all try to feign like we don't find this horribly offensive, but I think that that's a disingenuous one. And also, it's like us being self-censoring now. But now we can't just like identify that this awful thing that this person just said is like actually awful. So I just don't see there seems like there's a tension between my self-censorship and your self-censorship if you're saying something offensive or if I'm saying something offensive. Like one
Yeah,
of us is
yeah.
going to have to self-censor in this situation. Um, yeah.
I see what you're saying, but I don't know. I think if someone wants to make that kind of statement, then I and other folks who think that that's racist should be able to say that we think that it's racist.
Well,
I
but you
think
just said that that would be shutting down the conversation
Mhm.
and forcing them into being self-censoring. So,
Yeah, yeah. We have to develop the norms of communication where a person can articulate their views, another person can articulate their views, and both sides feel that they can leave that space and not think that, okay, in the future I cannot say that. That's kind of where I want to go. So that person needs to know that people think this particular claim or statement is racist. They need to know that, and for them to know that, other people have to tell them that. But
right.
I don't want to think that this person now has to worry in the future that, okay, maybe if I say this is racist. Okay, I don't want to do that. So I guess I'm arguing for a shift in the cultural norms of communication.
Mhm.
Uh, so
Yeah. Um, so I have a couple of reactions. One is like I haven't taught college class in a few years. I did a TA position when I was getting my master's back in 2017, 2016. So I haven't taught since then. And before that, I taught high school. I do have some relevant experiences from teaching high school. I mean, there were kids that were creationists. I taught biology, and so I
oh,
had to
interesting.
navigate
Wow.
kind of this disparity in beliefs. Um, my approach there was to say, "Hey, you can believe whatever you want, but in this classroom, we talk about science, and there's a scientific perspective that's backed up by mountains of evidence that talks about evolution. If you want to continue to believe in creationism, that's completely your business, but it's just not within the realm of science, and so we're not going to talk about it." um and I think you could, you know if a kid was like, well, if you're teaching a college level course on disparities, and some kid is like, well, maybe it's just because black people aren't as smart and that's why these disparities exist, then I would just be like, that is an outdated scientific idea.
Mhm.
It no longer is
Yeah.
entertained really in the current research. I understand that you believe that, but it's not a scientific idea in the same way that the ones that we're going to discuss in this class are. They're not. It wouldn't pass peer review, and so we're going to leave that behind. And if they continuously bring it up, I would like kind of bring them, ask them to stay after class and be like, hey, this is not a set of ideas that we're really navigating in this class. So just try to, you know, keep it to yourself um, on these topics. Like you can believe that. But the other thing I was going to say in response to what you're saying is like the term racist is just so uh, filled with
Yeah.
connotation
It has
that
moral implications as well
there's
as
no
evidentiary ones. Yeah.
right. So you can be as nice as you want and say, "Hey, I think what you said was a little racist," or "I think you're being racist." And no matter how nicely you say it, that person is still going to feel like they need to self-censor later. I mean, so you're just not gonna. There's no way to square that circle, I feel like.
Well, it will be tough, but my argument is that we have to move towards that so that we can prevent what I think is going to be even more censoring, at least in the immediate terms, self-censoring in the immediate term here, because we're going through some cultural shifts that people who are my age and older are having to deal with, and we might want to talk about those things. And you got people who are like, "Oh, you said this? Oh my God, you're the most sexist person in the world." And the person is like, "I'm just trying to tell you what I think," And I want to push back against that happening. So I mean, yeah, you're right. Someone says racist, and you can't say it nicely, but who knows? Maybe we can teach people how to express their disagreement in a way that does not necessarily impugn the motivations or make some personal attack on the other person. That's possible too, right?
I think that
So
yeah, that I would love to experiment more as a teacher. Like I said, I don't have a lot of experience as running my own class, but I think one thing that I would like to do at the top of the class, let's say I'm going to teach a class on disparities or economic inequality or racial inequality or something. Um, Kind of start at the top of the class, be like, I want this to be a space where you can ask difficult questions. Um, so though this gets us into maybe the next question, which is like there's this tension between ideological diversity and demographic diversity. And I think that that is one that is difficult to know the right answer to. So the way that you're framing it from my perspective is putting a lot of the work, the emotional labor, one might say, on the group of people who have a problem with what the racist is saying. And it's not putting any of the work on the person who has like a racist thing to say it better. And
It's
I think
both.
that's
It's both. Both people have to learn. It's a shift in how we communicate, which
right,
probably, everyone, both the speaker and the audience, they have to learn.
right. And I think like, you know, sometimes when somebody says something that's like heterodox or whatever, I feel like the biggest problem with the thing that they said that's like heterodox is they said it in an inflammatory way and they could have gone about it in a better way. And
Mhm.
most people probably would have taken the idea on board had they done it with a little less cavalier and a little more thoughtfulness embedded and some more nuance embedded in the way that they're talking. I feel like that is at least 50% of the problem with a lot of people who are feeling heterodox. You don't
Yeah,
have to.
we got someone who responded in the chat. You don't have to call someone out as racist, even if you think what they're saying is. So, um,
This is the self-censorship thing all over again, right? So who's going to self-censor? The person who said the thing that came across as racist, or the person who feels like that was kind of racist, I want to talk about it? Who are we going to tell to self-censor? And Rachel
yeah,
saying the person who wants to call the other person out as being racist, that person's just self-censor. Okay, like interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I kind of agree with Manuel here. Like the person has to be able to say, they have to articulate in some way that they think the claim or the comment is racist. I might disagree with Manuel in that I think both sides can come up with better ways of articulating those things.
sure.
So I don't know how we would do that, but yeah, yeah. I mean, you need to be able to say what you feel, but clearly you're dealing with human beings here. You have to figure out how to say that. So I kind of cut you off, but I saw that pop up in the chat, so I wanted to make sure that
No, I appreciate you. This is
yeah.
great. It's more dynamic, and
Hmm.
Rachel and I know each other, and so it's great that she's here to listen in and contribute.
Okay.
Um,
Hmm.
so the other thing I was going to say is, this, I'm sure, and a lot of people bring this up in this conversation that like pretty much from the dawn of the country, minority groups have been the ones who have been self-censoring.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
even Brianna Joy Gray, in her conversation with Emma Camp, specifically talked about how when she was going through law school and stuff, it was so many times where a professor was saying something racially problematic or another student, and all the black students like talk about it afterwards and talk about how like it was a problem whenever it was happening, but they
Hmm.
don't say anything in class. And I think like in general, lots of women, lots of like underrepresented minority groups in academia go their entire careers, in undergrad and even before, listening to like really uneducated and ignorant white people say a lot of ignorant and uneducated things about
Hmm.
issues around race and around gender, and they just don't say anything. So that group probably self-censors more than any other group. Um, and now we're saying you need to self-censor more because Emma Camp or other like more like centrist or conservative types don't like to be told that you don't like what they have to say. And so I just think like we do have this tension between like creating an environment where African American and Hispanic and trans and all these different groups that have been historically marginalized want to have an opportunity to say what they feel. But then you also have another group who wants to say things that offends them. And so if you want to create an environment that's like friendly to either of these two camps, you're going to have to move the dial one way or the other in a way that like is going to make an unfriendly environment for one or the other. So which one are we going to pick? And in my view, I think we shouldn't go all
Interesting.
the way to one side. Like obviously we shouldn't, just like completely no conservatives can talk. Like I don't think that's the solution, but we do have a historical thing that we're trying to correct, right? Like the ship has always been steered by conservative white people, like, and so we're, for the first time, we're kind of like moving the ship a little bit over to the other side, and everybody's upset about it, which makes sense, from like a social psychological standpoint. People defend the status quo, but I'm not sure that this is as huge a problem as it is being described as.
So, okay, you're right that minority groups historically have self-censored because they're one of the only. So you're gonna, you know that your views are the minority views, or your experiences are the minority experiences. So you will self-censor. That is a problem. I think, though, that the way to deal with that is not necessarily to say, okay, well, because you had to self-censor in the past, now you talk as much as you want, and because you could
Right.
talk as much as you want, now you self-censor. I'm not entirely sure if that's necessarily the appropriate way forward.
Right.
In my view, Emma Camp. Oh no, actually, I'll just no, because she probably wouldn't identify this way. I would say conservatives on campus are, at least ideologically speaking, not demographically speaking, the minority.
Yeah.
In terms of the
Well,
things that
depending
they
on the
would say.
campus. But yeah.
Okay, sure, you're right, depending on the campus. So I would like to afford whatever, because you're right, minorities have had that trouble. If we can come up with a way of making it so that we recognize that that minority needs to have a little more ability to communicate, I think it's fine, and that should go to conservatives too.
Right.
I mean, so here's the thing that has always kind of frustrated me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people just, and this kind of gets us to, I guess, the next question in a way. So I'll kind of do my spiel up here, and then you can kind of respond. Is there a censorship problem, and if so, why is it happening? So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people on the left will say, censorship problem? What censorship? Like they'll like it doesn't exist, and that is incredibly frustrating to me, because okay, if you have one kook out there saying that I can't talk on campus, all right, fine, you can kind of dismiss that person. But if you have a lot of people making that claim, when you have research data, survey research data saying that, when you have people like me even who says they've seen it in their class, okay, admit it's a problem, and instead, or no, I'm sorry, admit that it's happening, and then
Right.
we can talk about whether or not it's a problem. And the thing that gets to me is a lot of folks don't even want to admit it's a problem. I keep confused. Don't even want to admit that it's happening, right? So you
Right.
can't get to the next stage of the analysis. But to me, clearly, it's happening.
Yeah, I think it's become like a partisan issue that's just like people have dug in on either side, and so some people are, as part of digging in on the left side, some people just say it's not happening, which I don't think is super helpful. I do think there's a reasonable debate that can be had about to what extent it's happening and to what
Yes, I
extent it's
think
a
so
new
too.
phenomena. Unfortunately, like, so you mentioned people's like experiences that they report, and you mentioned the data, and you mentioned just like your own personal experiences. So the strongest of those pieces of evidence, of course, are the data. Then that would be kind of like the FIRE data set and stuff like that.
Right. Or
Um,
Pew, I think they did something too, where they showed that conservatives felt that they couldn't say as much on campus as they'd like, or something of that nature. So, because
yeah,
people really push back against that FIRE one, they say, "Oh, FIRE is a center right organization, so they're going to generate data for that." So, yeah.
I think it has valuable information, but I think it underestimates the censoriousness on the right. And so then there's this whole conversation about like, where is the censoriousness coming from? Is it coming from the left? Is it coming from the right? I think if you just anybody who's paying attention to kind of like the policy side of things, it's clearly coming from the right.
Yeah, I
Like if we're
agree.
just looking at anti-LGBT legislation, like Florida's HB 1557, and there's like 15 new bills that are under consideration across 9 different states
Yeah, it's
trying to
amazing. It's
silence
amazing.
conversations about LGBT stuff,
Mhm.
not to mention book bans, not to mention CRT gag bills, like all of this stuff. Trump like trying to do all the stuff that he was doing also on censoriousness, and like calling the press the enemy of the people, stuff like that. Like the degree to which censoriousness is imbalanced and primarily coming from the right. is extraordinary. Now, setting that aside, because I think like we all, well, I don't know, people who are following these issues know where that's happening, how that's happening. So if the question is the left contributing to that its own kind of censoriousness? I just don't see like policies very often that require some kind of censoring of anything from the
Mhm.
left. So the real question is the kind of thing where the interpersonal kind of censorship, like shutting someone down on Twitter and ratioing them, or like having a conversation in class and saying you're racist, I don't think you should talk anymore, or something like that. Right?
Mhm.
Are we kind of on the same page here?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. When it comes to policy, the right. So when it comes to state censorship, the right is really where that's coming from. And then
Right.
yeah, in everyday interactions, it might be that in our institutions, it might be that that is coming from the left. Yeah.
Yeah. And even on in terms of private institutions censoring people. I mean, so people like to mention that social media is like biased against conservatives, but when you actually look at the data, like the most popular pages on Facebook are conservative pages. Like the people who get the most shares and likes and stuff like that are largely from the conservative side of the aisle. So
Mhm.
that part, even so, really it's just interpersonally are like there's a bunch of woke students basically who are like shutting people down, and that's the kind of censorship we have that comes from the left. So in terms of, is that a problem? So yeah, as we said, one of the big problems with the fire database is we don't have a before and then after. We know that if you look at polling data from Pew, we know that
Mm.
people today are more supportive of free speech than they were 30 years ago. Like those trend lines have trended up. Like
Mm.
everybody just supports free speech in a way that hadn't been in the past. So if we're just looking at like from a pure historical analysis, like it seems like we're pretty much on an upswing when it comes to support for free speech. Um, I don't know if you have a reaction to that, but I feel like that's an important.
It's not in front of me, but one can be skeptical. Of course, you can support free speech, and then at the same time, still, pile on someone on Twitter for saying something that you don't agree with.
Yeah. So
But
so
yeah,
I oh sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, finish your thought.
Yeah, so in terms of piling on free speech, I think there's a handful of behaviors that are being called censorship, like ideological censorship, which are really
Mhm.
just following a set of incentives that are resulting from the incentive structure of social media, right?
Mhm.
You just get more shares if you're being an asshole, or you're being
That's true.
inflammatory.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's just the way it is. That's the way social media works. I don't think it says any much about human nature other than human beings are organisms that respond to incentives in their environments. In terms of like, has there been a drastic shift in the way we perceive censorship or whatever? I don't know, because it's confounded with the rise of social media. So
Hmm.
I just find it to be a
So
very difficult thing to be parse.
yeah, to tease out. All right. So okay, I agree with you that the causes of this phenomena are complex, and it could be more than just simply young people not wanting others to talk. It could be the incentive structure of social media or our communication environment in general. I actually agree with that. I think that would be. I would like to read more about that. Someone's probably doing that somewhere.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I agree with that. The outcome though, I think is that yes, there that you have to be very careful, more careful than in the past of what you say,
Yeah.
because people will come out against you, and that could have repercussions to your career or reputation or whatnot.
Right.
My view is that so this is a theoretical one now. I got no data, so
We're kind of both
this
doing that. Like I some of these
well,
things I can cite, other things, like how is social media versus ideological stuff. Like I don't know
hmm.
of a paper that navigates that space. It seems like a thing I've talked about a couple times, but I don't know about like a literature that gets into it. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. To me, well, actually, I do have some data. So I wrote a piece for my Substack a week ago or so, where there's this world value survey where
Mhm.
they look at the values across like 200 countries over time, and the big takeaway is that as a country becomes wealthier, the people in that country move away from security and tradition, and they start focusing on self-expression and looking at the world in different ways. Okay.
Mhm.
And so in this country and also other Western countries, we are on that end of self-expression and non-traditionalism. And I was making the argument that this is what woke is. This is what woke is. Being woke means that you care not about whether or not someone has a job so much, but you care about the quality of their life. And so in the United States and other countries, actually more in other countries, United States is a little bit further on that scale to the left, or if you want to think about politically, to the right. We tend to worry about the quality of life of queer communities, of immigrants, of religious minorities, of people of color. We worry about that. And that quality of life is not just whether or not they're working, but how you talk to them, what they experience, microaggressions, these types of things. And
Right.
so I think that shift is powering a lot of this. And because a person like me, okay, so I'm 47, I think now. I should know that, right? But after a while, man, you stop, you really don't care. So I think I'm about 47. And so I grew up in an age where, poor rural South, and it was about getting a job. It was about like, look, I wish you wouldn't perform this microaggression in front of me, but can I just get a job, right?
Yeah.
And can I just pay for what my family needs, this kind of thing. And I grew up in that environment. So that means a person like me and people my age and older, we find a lot of the ultra sensitivity to be a little bit crazy. But that's because we grew up in a different environment.
Right.
People at your age, I'm not saying you didn't struggle at all, man. Well, I'm just talking about in general, right? America is wealthier, is safer, especially since like post 1990 something. Like people growing up in the 2000s, it's just a much better and safer world. And so they are more likely to focus on these quality of life symbolic issues. And
Yeah.
I think that's powering it. And I would like to have that discussion. So I think censorship is a problem. So I'll just kind of answer that question. So I think it's happening, and I think it is a problem. I just don't know if it's a problem that I'll talk about, but it's at this point I think it's coded into our cultural DNA. So the next generation, unless we have a war or something, the next generation that comes along, they're going to be just like this, and the next generation they're going to be just like this, because that's the material environment that we live in. Now that's a pretty big theoretical thing, but that's kind of where my ideas are going.
Yeah, I see that makes sense. We're not struggling to we didn't go fight in World War II, and so what do we do instead? We have like smaller issues that we're dealing with. I think another thing here as well is, and I want to explore this more, but there's a little body of literature that I'm aware of, which is basically that inequality breeds a feeling of powerlessness. So like creates powerlessness in the people who are experiencing inequality. And so one of my hypotheses I have, and I'd really love to investigate this, so it might be something that pops up in my research, or maybe it's already been done and I'd love to read about it, but is that inequality is kind of also driving these things. People don't have the means to actually change their lives for the better, for the most
Oh,
part.
that's interesting.
There's very little you can do to substantially change your, not only your life, but to move society in a better direction. And we're kind of all like, you probably feel it all the time. Climate change is horrible. I can't do anything about it. And it's just powerlessness constantly. I'm more aware now than I've ever been about the problems and challenges that society is facing. And it also just feels like I'm so atomized and completely separated from the power structures that make decisions about these things. And so what do I have? What can I do? I can yell at someone on Twitter, right? That feels good. It feels like I'm making a difference. And to some extent, like it's the same thing with me, right? What do? I write a blog post, and that makes me feel like I'm making some kind of positive difference.
Yeah, it gives you some agency. Well, I mean, in
So-
some ways, I mean, writing those things do help in a way. I mean, you're contributing to the dialogue. Yeah, I
yeah.
get what you're saying, man. I do.
So
And that could be
but
a
I think
part of
that's
it as well.
consistent with what you're arguing. I think like it's they're the same points. It's just adding another layer, and then it's also consistent with the incentive structures too. Why are people engaging with bad versions? Why aren't everybody else writing blogs and sharing blogs and being more thoughtful about these things? Because they want to get those shares, they want to get that dopamine hit, right? So then you add all of these things together, and you kind of get the situation we're in right now.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I want to go back. So those people who are outraged about things and can't do anything about it, and so they go on Twitter. They don't have agency, I guess, in a way, political agency or something.
Mhm.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm going to be sympathetic to the geezers here a little bit,
Okay.
um, because they're less likely to do that, right?
Mhm.
And I'm going to go back to this that what I was talking about earlier about generational shifts and growing up in certain environments. It's just been a massive. This is like a big cohort effect, right? Where it's like, okay, if you grew up 1990s and above and later, you're just in a completely different world, and so your values and beliefs are different than people who are older. And you're the people who are writing the blogs and doing the retweeting and the tweeting and all that stuff. You're more active on social media, and so you get this person. And listen, I am not trying here. I'm going to say something, and I'm not trying to excuse the behavior of some of these older folks.
Sure.
But I'm trying to understand that behavior, right?
Mhm.
I don't think that all those people that we're calling racist or bigoted or transphobic and all this stuff, and they need to be, you know, you know, get off this platform, and all this stuff. I don't think that those people are, for the most part, are trying to be racist or bigot or transphobic. They just grew up in a different world where, in their minds, communicating these ideas wouldn't necessarily be doesn't seem to be harmful.
Right.
And so um I do find that to be a problem. I understand that those folks are on their way, going out and stuff, but they'll be here for a while, and I just find that to be very sad and problematic. And I'm gonna tell you, man, I was one of those people who was this was just recently, like a year or two ago, like, hey, this is terrible. What is Steven Pinker saying? What is he saying today? This type of thing. And I think it kind of started with the Kathleen Stock thing. And I know a lot of people will hate me for this, but I looked
Mm.
at it and I was like, okay, yeah, this is not good. Can we find a better way of dealing with this? I just didn't think that the pushback that she got and others got necessarily warranted the crime, because I didn't
Right.
see a crime. But that's because I'm over a certain age where I just see it as talk, and so anyway, that's a little bit of a digression there, but I think in many ways we agree, man.
Yeah.
I think with some slight disagreement, which is what you said before we started talking.
I think it's a lot. It's like it's a matter of degrees.
Hmm.
Yeah. So like I also think specifically censorship on the left, because I think we both agree, like obviously censorship on the right is a huge problem. Censorship on the left, I agree, is also a problem. I guess my interpretation of it is it's more incidental than it is embedded as a component of left ideology. Like
It's a good way of putting it.
historically
Yeah, yeah.
it's always been kind of the left perspective that like there needs to be more freedom, not less. It's just kind of always been that perspective, and I think that that is still an embedded component of the ideology of the left. It's just that there is this now there's a whole new set of incentives, and also, and the other thing that we haven't talked about, I guess explicitly, it's been embedded in our conversation so far, is that um, we're having these conversations for the first time. Like it just wasn't the case that if that like black people and women could say, hey, I actually think this shit's fucked up, like I don't think we should be doing this. And so now we're like barely entertaining those ideas, and of course there's growing pains, like
Are you old enough to use that profanity?
I am 31, I'll have you know.
You're
I
right,
got
man.
gray.
You're
I got
right.
gray in my beard. So no. So I just feel like that's the other thing. We're growing into this. We're trying to figure out how to navigate a whole new set of problems. A whole new set of people have a voice now that didn't have a voice before, and a whole new set of people who got to just have carte blanche over what they do and say are now having to think like, what can I do and say? How should I think? How should I say it? What's the better way I could? What's a more nuanced perspective? At the exact same time that we are like incentivizing lack of nuance and all of that stuff. So it just seems like a really complicated problem with a bunch of like components, and it's hard for me to isolate and say actually the left is the problem. And like, well, you take the left out of this like unequal, badly incentivized situation where, and then put them somewhere else. And I feel like, yeah, they're not going to engage in the same type of behavior, but
Hmm.
that's not the
Okay.
situation we're in.
All right. Well, we got one more question here, but it's not quite redundant. So it's more focused on the self. So
Right.
is there a self, like do people feel that they can't say what they want to say? What do you think?
Yeah, so certainly. And I also think like something that feels missing from this conversation often, certainly in the article that Emma Camp wrote, is just like that's kind of what it means to be an adult. Like if I said every stupid thing that came into my head, like I think I'd be a social pariah. Like I don't know. Like this is just component of growing up and being a person, is deciding for yourself like actually that thing that's in my head for whatever reason, I don't need to say that. And I think in particular when we're talking about touchy social issues that have a lot to do with historical injustices and inequalities, yeah, more I actually think to some extent more white people, definitely men, white men like myself, despite having a Hispanic last name, um, who kind of need to be like, do I need to be the center of this conversation again? You know, um,
I don't know, man.
I feel like it's like this is a
uh,
struggle I had, man. Like more,
mm,
I'm find myself often in conversations about these types of issues with other. So I have a lot of black colleagues, I have a lot of women colleagues,
mhm.
and I don't want to be the person who's just talking the whole time.
That's not okay. It's first off, yes, you're right. Historically, and just as a good human being, you have to self censor, right?
Right.
You have to decide what you can and should say, and when and how. Um, yeah, I agree with that.
Okay.
But no, I don't think that white men need to self censor. Uh, I mean, if I'm in a classroom, I want to hear what that white man has to say.
So
So so
yeah,
so so.
this was your really good point, which is like maybe an academic setting is a unique situation where we
Uh-huh.
actually should. Sorry. So I like that point, and I want you to elaborate on it.
Okay, but you're saying that in maybe just in everyday work context, or you're at a bar with someone and you happen to dive into this weighty conversation about race. I don't know why someone would do that in a bar, but anyway, it might happen that white man needs to just listen.
Not
Okay,
necessarily. Well, I'm not saying it's a statistical argument, right? It's not 100% of the time you should just listen. It's like sometimes you'll want to say some shit that's in your head,
uh-huh.
and just like sometimes it's actually better to not.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's true.
it's
That's true.
it's just a
I mean,
percentage thing. Like
yeah,
yeah,
and it's I mean, you are we're focusing a lot on race here, but
yeah,
I try to also make it clear that this goes for a lot of other things. I mean, as someone who is straight, and I
hmm,
happen to be in a conversation with folks who are talking about their queer identity or the issues that they may face. Okay, let me just figure out what's going on here, and
right.
so I would need to self-censor. I agree with that. I think the people who are complaining about self-censorship may be taking a different approach. They may be arguing that, okay, yeah, we need to self-censor, sure, but I don't want to feel that I can't contribute to this conversation without being demonized or feel like I'm a bad person.
Right.
Right? So that white guy or straight guy, right, or just man in general, who might want to contribute to a conversation about race, class, gender, or something,
Right.
he should be able to do so. Just you're right. He needs to kind of censor a little bit, but he still should eventually be able to say something and not feel like he's going to get, kicked out of the room or something.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a thing where, so I mentioned that I self-censor here and there, right? But
Hmm.
I also feel pretty comfortable just like stating an opinion that's unpopular or whatever. So I took a class as a graduate student, and we had a long conversation about implicit bias. And uh I kind of went hard on, very much like we read a Jesse Singal article, um, which he kind of wrote like a long article about how implicit bias is kind of like not doing what it proposes to do, the IAT test in particular.
Mhm.
And we really talked about how the test is being used to like label people as racist or not racist, like implicitly racist or not implicitly racist, which I agree with Jesse that that actually can't be done. Like the data that implicit bias IAT gathers is not suitable for making such a judgment. And we talked about this for a while. And one of my colleagues in the class, um, who is black, kind of pointed out like you're very much obsessing about like how white people feel about being labeled with this variable, but
Yeah.
like there are other things to like think about here. Like implicit bias is like just one component of a larger critique, and like kind of like reoriented the class around like all you're talking about is white people's feelings. um
Yeah, that's a big critique of these things.
and
Absolutely.
and so when she brought that up, somebody I could see somebody who isn't me being like, man, I feel like I really got told off. Like, I don't know if I'm going to bring up my next thing that I want to be in class. I didn't feel that way. I was just like, that is a damn good point.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And I appreciate you bringing it up. And I think that's an important thing to say. And I think I even broke into class again. Like I said something else because it's on Zoom. So you kind of have to take turns. Absolutely. Great point. We just kind of went down a rabbit hole. But I think that's a completely valid point, and I completely agree. And you just kind of, I don't know, you got to like roll with the punches. I was also trying to speak with nuance, right? Like I'm trying like not to state things in a very like inflammatory way. And you kind of have to do your homework to be able to do that, right? Like you have to understand the
Yeah,
issues you're
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about. So I just feel like
Hmm.
the onus, I feel like a lot of the onus of this conversation is putting it on the people who found what you said offensive. And like those people need to be quiet and stop doing that because it's creating a censorious environment. But I really feel like the thing that's missing is on the front end. Like the people who want to say things that are controversial, I just want people to think. I say controversial stuff all the time. I do it with my friends. I do it with my colleagues. I do it with my family. I do it constantly. I like to discuss politics. I like to like put people in a place where they have to encounter an idea that they've never encountered before and like see
Mhm.
what they're going to do about it. And it takes a lot of effort. You have to read. You have to like think. You have to like formulate those arguments. You have to run it by someone you really trust first, right? Like the article Emma Camp talks about, like I sometimes I want to talk about something and my friend will close the door and she like finds that really problematic. And I'm like, dude, if I didn't have my girlfriend to talk through shit first, I would definitely be saying a lot of stupid shit to other people more, right? Because I have her, and so I know that she has unconditional positive regard for me. So I can
Mhm.
like hit her with these arguments, and she's like, "Ooh, that doesn't sound good," or "That doesn't. You haven't really thought about this. You haven't thought about that." And then that makes me just a more well-rounded person when I have this conversation with the next person. And it's a similar thing like when I talk to conservatives. Um, I'm saying my standard arguments and like, well, I have a big problem with that. And I'm like, I didn't think that you would have a big problem with that, but that's interesting. Let's explain, let's talk why. Let's like explore that area of disagreement. Um and as I'm saying all this, you're probably sitting there like, yeah, this the purpose of ideological diversity is so that we can like do this,
Mhm.
have these conversations. But I guess I'm saying you like play test them in front of an audience of people who like has positive regard for you, and you find the way to navigate that conversation effectively there. And then if you
Mm.
want to like talk about it in a more public space, you have a nuanced perspective and you can do that. um yeah, I don't know what you think about that.
Okay. Well, you said something earlier. So there's a chat. Someone said something in the chat, so I'm going to put this up in a second. But
Cool.
first, I you mentioned something earlier about your a student in your class. No, that's not right. A colleague,
Yeah.
peer, I guess, in the class that you were taking, mentioned that that whole thing about single and implicit bias was about what white people think, and there's this entire edifice of discussion that he's leaving out, just focusing on this narrow thing here. I think I felt that way with the white fragility conversation. So there was this all this text about how it's this sort of Kafkaesque trap, right?
No.
Where
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can't, you can't say something without being seen as fragile. And oh, this is terrible, And I was like,
Yeah.
look, dude, the, there are black people who are trying to have this conversation. You're not considering that at all. You're not considering all the times that black folk in corporate environments. 'Cause that's where D'Angelo was kind of aiming, I think. Corporate or work environments have tried to bring up race and they've got dumped on. That's kind of ultimately the main issue here. And that just gets lost because white folks are kind of trying to defend themselves. So, I mean, when you said that, it was true it rung true to me about what your peer said. And yeah,
Mhm.
you're right. People need to kind of develop their conversational muscles here and kind of roll with the punches, test things out. Yeah, that's true. We got to develop that way of communicating, and we don't have it. And it might be like you said, this is the first time we're having these. Look, people 10 years from now will be like, okay, I know what to do in this situation. It won't be so
Right.
bad. So
Yeah.
here's something from the chat here. I'm gonna try and bring it up. I think this is meant for me, Manuel. Can you engage with the perspective that censorship is sometimes good? That it is a way to protect the public space from toxic views that devalue the person or persons who are often minorities. Okay, I can certainly engage with that, and I think censorship is sometimes good. For me, I tend to make distinctions between when and where it's done, but yeah, certainly not only when and where it's done. So I've already kind of talked about the fact that I think in classrooms and maybe town halls we should have a wider latitude, but also in relationships. So as a professor, I really have to censor because I'm in a position of authority, and what I say might have a little bit more meaning. So therefore, I have to self-censor, and I think my university should make sure that professors are very careful with what they say to students. So yeah, it's one of those things of context and so yeah, I agree. Sometimes censorship is good. So Manuel,
Yeah.
we have went over an hour, just barely, but I like to keep it at about an hour. And also, it started raining, so I've lost all my natural light. So I'm
Yeah,
sort
I
of
noticed that. I was like,
trying
"Is
to
it
get out.
nighttime there already? What's going on?"
Yeah, and I tried to do it without my lights, lights this time. So
Yeah,
um,
I had a quick reaction to O'Neill here,
mhm.
which is that there is a belonging problem on campus. There is a problem where Black students, but in general, underrepresented minority students feel like they don't belong on campus, and these little signals contribute to that. So there is a. This is why I brought up the tension between ideological and demographic diversity as we're trying to create a more demographically diverse space on campus, which we just haven't gotten there. The further you go up, the more that there is disparities where white people and Asian people are overrepresented in academia, and Hispanic and Black people are underrepresented. Um, we do have this problem. Like we have to figure out how to continue to make a space that is more that cultivates a sense of belonging, that gives Black people a sense that they are valued in this space, not just Black people, but just like underrepresented minority groups in general. So and there is this tension of just like saying, yeah, but we also want conservatives to basically say that the civil rights movement was bad or whatever. So we do have this tension, and I agree with you, O'Neill, that um, we got to figure out a way to make to I want to prioritize like fixing the historical injustice that's existed for hundreds of years. That seems like a priority to me. And if we're going to deprioritize that so that we can have more conservatives, that seems like the wrong trade-off to me.
Okay. Well, we got another chat. This is John Farah. John Farah is a friend of mine, a Twitter mutual.
Oh yeah.
Maybe you also, yeah, know him too. It seems to me that people saying you're not allowed to say X anymore are really saying this. Okay, okay. So I've heard this argument before. Why can't I say Black people have a low IQ, or why do we keep getting the gay agenda? Yes, yes, that's what they're saying. They want to be able to say those things, and I'm just taking the view that you know what, we have to figure out a way for them to unfortunately, in a democracy, articulate these things, which is crazy for many people. I know I'm a little weird here, but I think that we have to, because I mean that's just they're citizens here. I mean they're our fellow citizens, and if they feel that way, um, in the right context, I want them to be able to say it. So yeah.
So just to clarify, if you had a student who was just like, well, they just like continually bring up, or let's just say the first time they're like, well, don't Black people have just lower IQs anyway? So they're just like not as smart. Like,
Mhm.
what do you say to that student?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say, okay, the evidence suggests that our racial inequality is not based on this score. Even the score is questionable. We have problems with that. So the prevailing evidence within our discipline is that no, it has nothing to do with IQ. I would make the same argument if they brought up a cultural explanation too. I would say, look, it just doesn't seem like that's the evidence here. I would even probably, maybe not in front of the class. I'm not sure if I'm good enough to do it that way, but I would tell them, say, look, your arguments lead to some conclusions here that are really bad, right? I mean, if you think black people are genetically different, then that leads to laws passed against people who are fundamentally different than other people, and you don't want that. And so yeah. Eventually, if a person keeps talking about that, you have to address it.
Right.
Certainly, I agree with that. So,
Yeah.
John is saying something else, but John, we're gonna get off. But I'm sure I'm sure I'll see you on Twitter. So, Manuel, this has been fun, man.
It has been.
I
Thanks for
really
having me.
appreciate it. Yeah, yeah. So you can follow Manuel on Twitter at Sci Social Probs. I don't know why he didn't do like everyone else and use his name, but Manuel's cool that
It's
way.
matching my blog. It's matching my blog. Science and Social Problems.
So yeah, he's got a blog and he's got a podcast. And thanks, man. Do you want to end it with anything?
Brand new thing for us is the Bit More Complicated podcast, and so you can search a Bit More Complicated on any platform that has a podcast that hosts podcasts, and you should be able to listen to me and my co-host Dylan Selterman talk about issues like these, anything that has to relate to the problems of society and what we can do about them, and addressing them from an evidence-based perspective. So thank you, Rob, for having me on.
All right.